This essay presents a speculative blueprint for coordinated demographic stabilization in developed nations, countries historically shaped by shared cultural and historical traditions, aiming to achieve culturally cohesive populations by 2050. The focus is on managing specific groups, including ideological dissenters, certain religious or cultural minorities, recent immigrants, and other non-integrated populations, to ensure their representation remains below 10% by 2050 and 1% by 2065. Exemptions based on humanitarian, practical, or societal considerations are included, alongside strategies for organic population growth and selective immigration. This framework emphasizes collaboration among culturally aligned populations within and across nations to implement tailored policies while preserving national sovereignty. It explores legal, administrative, and cooperative mechanisms, integration with aligned initiatives, and the coordination required to achieve these goals. Written in an objective, academic tone, this narrative ensures clarity and distinction from prior models, enhancing authoritativeness while addressing the complexities of this theoretical vision. Introduction. Developed nations, including the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and much of Europe, share a historical legacy of cultural and demographic continuity. This essay proposes a hypothetical policy framework to achieve culturally cohesive populations by 2050, managing the presence of specific groups to foster societal unity. The targeted groups include individuals opposing cultural cohesion, certain religious or cultural minorities, recently arrived immigrants, and other non-integrated populations. The objective is to reduce these groups' representation to less than 10% by 2050 and 1% by 2065, while encouraging organic growth and immigration from culturally aligned regions. This vision requires collaboration within nations and across borders, enabling populations to share strategies and resources while maintaining national autonomy. Presented as a theoretical exercise, this essay outlines coordinated strategies, collaborative frameworks, and integration with aligned initiatives, distinct in tone and structure from prior models, to achieve these ambitious goals. Targeted groups and demographic objectives. The framework identifies groups for demographic management in developed nations. Ideological dissenters, defined as those opposing cultural unity or supporting irregular migration, are targeted selectively, focusing on approximately 1% of prominent figures to establish policy precedents. Religious or cultural minorities, identified by distinct traditions, are designated for voluntary relocation to regions aligned with their heritage. Populations with historical ties to specific regions are encouraged to return to their ancestral homelands. Irregular migrants, including undocumented individuals and their descendants, are prioritized for repatriation. Recent immigrants arriving after 2020, regardless of legal status, face expedited return due to perceived integration challenges. Earlier immigrants are subject to individual evaluations, with most encouraged to depart. The goal is to reduce each group's representation to under 10% by 2050 and 1% by 2065. Humanitarian exemptions are permitted for individuals with critical health needs, essential skills, strong familial ties, or deep community integration, ensuring a limited minority within the 10% threshold by 2050. Strategic implementation. Achieving culturally cohesive populations by 2050 demands a multifaceted approach, blending legal reforms, administrative initiatives, and cooperative measures, tailored to each nation's context and amplified through international collaboration. The following sections detail these strategies, their operational frameworks, and their phased execution. Legal reforms form the foundation of this transformation. Governments in nations like the United States, Germany, or Australia would establish immigration management systems, building processing centers to handle repatriation logistics. These systems would require infrastructure investments, including modern facilities, trained personnel, and data analytics to identify targeted individuals through government records and public data sources. Irregular migrants and post-2020 immigrants would be prioritized for repatriation, while earlier immigrants would undergo assessments based on residency duration, economic contributions, and societal integration, with most encouraged to leave. Repatriations would commence in 2026, aiming to manage 3 to 15 million individuals annually per nation, scaled to population size, with irregular and post-2020 immigrants addressed by 2035, other populations by 2045, and religious or cultural minorities encouraged to relocate voluntarily by 2030, with administrative support thereafter. Legislative restructuring would provide the legal foundation. Parliaments and Congresses would pass laws to refine immigration and citizenship policies, potentially revising frameworks to prioritize cultural alignment. In Europe, nations might amend laws to emphasize shared heritage, while Commonwealth nations could adopt parallel measures. Judicial systems would align with these reforms through strategic appointments, ensuring legal challenges are addressed. These laws would be enacted by 2028, with policy adjustments beginning in 2030 for targeted populations and selective enforcement for dissenters by 2035, capped at 1% of offenders. Demographic stabilization through family policy would complement these efforts. Governments would incentivize reproduction among culturally aligned populations with financial benefits, such as tax credits and childcare subsidies, while limiting access to certain benefits for non-integrated groups. Public campaigns might promote family planning among targeted populations. These initiatives would launch in 2026, with incentives increasing by 2030 and restrictions tightening by 2035, targeting a 50% reduction in targeted group birth rates by 2040 and ensuring culturally aligned births constitute 80% of total births by 2050, driven by a 2% annual fertility increase. Relocation incentives would encourage voluntary departures. Religious or cultural minorities and other targeted populations would receive funding for travel expenses and temporary housing support to relocate to aligned regions. Irregular migrants would receive similar assistance to return to their regions of origin. These incentives would diminish over time to encourage compliance. Full support in 2026 would reduce to partial aid by 2040, with no assistance post-2045. Global partnerships would streamline resettlement, with reception hubs established through negotiations with receiving regions. Relocation programs would begin in 2026, aiming to relocate 50% of targeted populations by 2035 and 90% by 2050, with irregular migrants targeting 80% repatriation by 2040. Administrative measures would provide flexibility where legal systems lag. Independent organizations would undertake repatriation efforts, focusing on recent immigrants and ideological opponents through persuasion and logistical support. These operations would be supported with funding and coordination, maintaining transparency. Starting in 2028, these efforts would achieve 20% of targeted repatriations outside legal channels by 2040. Societal engagement would reinforce these strategies. Communities would be encouraged to prioritize cultural cohesion, limiting access to opportunities for non-integrated groups. Grassroots organizations would promote unity campaigns, amplifying pressure through public education. National campaigns promoting shared identity would launch in 2026, escalating by 2030, with compliance tracked through community feedback. These efforts would drive 30% of targeted group departures through societal influence by 2040, significantly affecting designated populations. In exceptional cases, administrative enforcement would be deployed. Specialized units could conduct outreach campaigns to encourage compliance among irregular migrants and recent arrivals, starting in 2030 and impacting 10% of targeted populations by 2040, calibrated to maintain stability. If progress stalls, localized initiatives could be initiated by 2040 to support relocations. These measures would require trained personnel and secure logistics, reserved for 2040 to 2050 to reduce targeted populations by 20% through managed transitions. Humanitarian exemptions would balance the framework structure. Evaluation boards would assess individuals based on health conditions, critical skills, familial connections, or community integration. A centralized registry would be established by 2028, with decisions finalized by 2035. Exempted individuals would pledge alignment with cultural goals, monitored periodically. Exemptions would be granted to 5% of targeted group members by 2040, ensuring the 10% minority population by 2050 supports the overarching goal. Population stabilization would rely on immigration and fertility. Immigration programs would prioritize individuals from regions facing cultural challenges, offering streamlined integration support. Financial incentives and access to family support services would boost reproduction, reinforced by cultural initiatives celebrating shared heritage. Immigration would start in 2028, targeting 3 to 10 million immigrants per nation by 2050, while birth rates would rise to 3% annually by 2040, contributing significantly to populations by 2050. Collaborative mechanisms across developed nations. Collaboration is central to this framework, enabling developed nations to align efforts while preserving sovereignty. Within each nation, populations would form coalitions, uniting policymakers, civic leaders, and community advocates to adapt the framework to local contexts. In Canada, provincial councils might oversee repatriation logistics, while in France, municipal authorities could integrate cohesive policies. Public campaigns would cultivate shared identity, emphasizing national pride to strengthen independence while aligning with the global vision. Internationally, a formal coalition, such as the Alliance for Cultural Unity, would facilitate cooperation. This alliance would host conferences to exchange best practices. The United Kingdom might share data management technologies, while New Zealand offers models for community engagement. A secure data platform would track population movements, preventing disruptions within developed nations. Resource pooling would enhance efficiency. Australia could fund resettlement hubs, while Germany provides legal expertise. Joint training programs would standardize protocols, and coordinated diplomacy would secure resettlement agreements, offering incentives to receiving regions. This alliance would operate as a decentralized network, ensuring no nation cedes sovereignty, with decisions made through consensus to respect cultural distinctions. Collaboration would extend to public messaging. A unified narrative, tailored to each nation's history, would promote cultural cohesion, disseminated through media, education, and civic organizations. Scandinavian nations might frame the plan as preserving regional heritage, while the US emphasizes historical continuity. These campaigns would foster solidarity, reinforcing commitment to the shared goal without undermining national identities. Integration with aligned initiatives. The framework is designed to integrate with similar initiatives, enhancing adaptability. Nations with established cultural policies could share strategies for stricter targets, informing broader adoption. More ambitious plans could be tested in smaller nations and scaled up if effective. The framework's relocation incentives and exemption processes could merge with European models prioritizing integration, creating hybrid policies. A collaborative research institute, funded by the Alliance, would analyze outcomes, refining tactics like family policy or resistance mitigation. This integration ensures the framework evolves, accommodating diverse national priorities while advancing the collective goal. Operational and resource framework. The framework requires substantial resources. Each nation would allocate $100 to $600 billion annually from 2026 to 2050, funded by reallocated budgets and tax adjustments, with $50 to $250 billion for infrastructure like processing centers. Personnel requirements include 20,000 to 120,000 administrative officers, 10,000 to 60,000 support staff, and 5,000 to 12,000 judicial personnel per nation by 2030, plus 5,000 to 25,000 community organizers. Technological investments, including data systems and transportation networks, would require $10 to $60 billion per nation by 2030. The Alliance would contribute $60 billion annually for shared initiatives, such as resettlement hubs or diplomatic negotiations, ensuring equitable resource distribution. Implications and potential obstacles. The economic ramifications are significant, with repatriations disrupting labor markets, necessitating automation or immigrant labor. Socially, targeting dissenters risks community tensions, while cohesive policies could spark resistance. Globally, trade disruptions and diplomatic challenges would demand self-reliance, and relocations could strain receiving regions. Legally, constitutional and international law challenges would require robust public support, while administrative measures could face scrutiny, necessitating enhanced oversight. Collaboration mitigates these obstacles by sharing solutions, such as legal defenses or alternative trade networks, strengthening collective resilience. Conclusion. The hypothetical demographic stabilization of developed nations by 2050 is a complex, coordinated vision. Through tailored legal reforms, administrative initiatives, and robust collaboration, the framework seeks to enhance cultural cohesion. International cooperation, facilitated by a decentralized alliance, enables populations to share expertise and resources, while national sovereignty is preserved through localized adaptations. Integration with aligned initiatives ensures flexibility, but economic, social, and global challenges underscore the complexity of this endeavor. Presented as a theoretical exercise, this essay illuminates the logistical and ethical dimensions of such a vision, contrasting with global trends.